So, my guest tonight is a guy who took a chance to pursue his dreams by leaving the security of employment to start working on a story he's been sitting on for years, a game called Insignia. Not long after calling the first shot, this user experience designer turned independent game developer began streaming his progress on Twitch, where he's built a keen audience that supports him along the way. Bearing the company name UpponHill, he's had the opportunity to exhibit Insignia at PAX 2017, Smash 2018, and publicly release the demo on itch.io. In the last few months, his reputation locally and online has grown significantly, releasing weekly YouTube tutorials under the title Indie Tales, and in March gave a talk on his journey thus far at the AIT Game Mastermind event. As we speak, he's gearing to launch a mobile game based on his Ludum Dare submission, Remember Apollo. It's my absolute pleasure tonight to introduce the listeners of Meeting Hill to my very own brother. Please give a warm welcome to Adam Younis. Hey, Adam.
Hello.
How you doing?
Doing very well. How are you doing, Pat?
I'm doing excellent. Thank you. Uh,
Wonderful.
how was your day? Going well?
Yeah, it's been going pretty well. I've been hard at work on my game following two root canal operations, which paused the project a little bit, but back on track now, pain-free, for this very special interview.
Awesome. Great. Well, I guess we should start with the first question, which is what's your background in digital media and how did it lead to starting Up on Hill?
Okay. So I have always been really into a lot of different kind of media. I've always had an interest in animation, in development, in music and art. And my digital media sort of journey really started at university. After a lot of little hobby stuff that I was doing in high school, I took a course called the Bachelor of Design Computing at the University of Sydney. And from there, took on a job as a user experience designer at a place called Massive, which is no longer Massive. It's called Delta Tray Sydney now.
Mm.
Um, so basically, yeah, interaction design, user experience design was a big part of my early professional career and my education, and that led me to Insignia eventually.
Cool. So what's what's Insignia then for the people who are listening? If you...
Sure. So I had been working at my UX design job for 3.5 years, and I just wasn't super satisfied with where everything was going because I had this sort of dream of being a game developer the whole time, and I felt myself getting older at 25 years old. um, and I just thought, look, I'm going to take this chance because it's something that I want to do. So I started writing. It actually started in 2014, the idea for the game, while I was working in my second year or my first year, I think it was. It was just this story about this guy lived in this world. It was sort of, it could have been anything at that point, maybe a graphic novel or like an actual book or something like that. But games being my passion, I just sort of started thinking about it as a game project, and I started researching, game engines that I could make the game in, and eventually started working on this game Insignia, which is now an action adventure game. It's a retro sort of themed romp through a fantasy world where you play this character Armin as he sort of has this big, hero's journey experience.
Awesome. It's funny because like obviously being your brother, I know all about this, but at the same time, it's I guess I never hear the way you explain all of this because I don't really tune into your streams as often as I used to, and hearing the way you pitch it is like I can recall all the pieces of this journey, and it's kind of awesome to see where it's come to. Um, but I guess you know yeah, no, I think that's like a perfect way to sum it up. That's really cool. Uh, so
I've been working on it for a while.
yeah, super neat. Uh,
Changes every time.
yeah. So I guess one of the questions that a friend of mine actually suggested asking because they were really curious. What are some of the biggest hurdles you've faced when working independently?
Mm. So, working independently, especially on a game, is a really huge undertaking. Game development involves a lot of different skills, and you have to put on a lot of different hats to do those uh, properly and sort of in sync. So games are pieces of software. So you've got your programming as software projects. You've got to put on the project development hat. You've got to be the artist and the composer and everything else that goes in between, as well as I do my own marketing and stuff. So having all of that, trying to orchestrate all of that together and maintain sort of timelines and a sense of self-confidence as I do it, that's been probably the biggest thing. Just this question of like, can I do this? Keeping everything in scope. It's just a giant thing to manage on my own.
Hmm. And like, I guess, what are the biggest? Where do you feel you have the least experience when it comes to building this kind of stuff? Is there anything in particular that you feel you kind of put to the side or struggle with the most? Or I know, just from, I guess, being around you, I think music is one that you find that you probably aren't as strong in. But like, are there any from, I guess, from like a development end, are there any parts of like the art or even like marketing that you find a challenge?
I think one thing that is maybe surprising, that has surprised me for sure, is when you've just got something in your head, like a vision. Before I even started any of this stuff, I imagined that the game would have a certain scope as far as the world that I was building and the ideas that would go into it and how they would be executed. That was really sort of more of an impression of what those things would be. And the process of making the game, um, trying not to lose sight of that vision over the course of it. So yeah, like definitely things like music, I want that to be in line with the strongest skills that I have. But even those stronger skills, if I'm not always kind of questioning if this is exactly what I want, it's very easy to fall into a rut where the first thing you do just gets accepted because you're busy and you've got lots to do, and thinking about how it all comes together and whether or not that actually meets the vision, the thing that I was trying to do in the first place. Um, that's like probably the biggest challenge, like managing the whole thing and keeping it on course.
Hmm.
And I
Okay.
definitely have no experience in that.
um, okay, so the next question kind of pulls a little bit more towards, I guess, the second half of what you've been up to, which is streaming. Um, you know, how has streaming on Twitch and more recently YouTube contributed or affected the progress you've been making on Insignia? And you know, are they? I'm sure that there's some positives, but are there any, I guess, frustrations or little things that you wish you could change that maybe get in the way, but obviously you don't reject, you know.
Oh, for sure. Like the process of um, conducting half of my work publicly has had like a giant impact on the project. It's sort of substituted one set of pressures for another set. So
Hmm.
marketing the game and building a sort of brand for myself was something that I knew that I wanted to do in hand, because I wanted this career, and I think um, there's sort of a passing sort of educational side of that I'd like to be involved in and sharing what I know. I think that's all sort of long-term thinking. Um, but overall, or primarily, the thing that's the biggest effect that it's had is I've gone from working like by myself in my room every day, trying to convince myself like to put on a good show and put my pants on at 9 a.m. and do all that stuff,
Hmm.
to and trying to like believe in myself, to now having lots and lots of people who believe in me, whether or not I actually do what I'm doing well, and trying to like balance that out and keeping them happy and um, sort of yeah, the pressure of keeping it going and maintaining growth um, definitely leads me down paths sometimes that are in service of the community more so than the game, and that's a struggle again to manage too.
Right.
It's definitely impacted the game's development, like overall, in terms of it's definitely slowed it down slightly, but I think it's kept the spirit a bit higher.
Hmm.
I don't know what I would have ended up with if I had just done it all by myself.
Yeah, I suppose that's interesting, right? You know, when you even just feedback and criticisms. I mean,
Mm.
obviously, when you release a demo, you get to see all that kind of stuff. But
Oh yeah,
having people see it as you make it, in having those second pair of eyes as it goes along the way, and kind of getting this like group critique must be super handy.
it's really valuable, yeah, for sure, to have all that feedback, and it keeps me accountable. Definitely, yeah.
Yeah.
It's a, I think overall it's been a very positive decision, even if it's made things take a little bit longer.
Hmm. Cool. Okay, so I guess going from there to talking about kind of the engines, you mentioned, earlier that it was about trying to find the right engine to use to build what you wanted to build. Um, how do you reckon the accessibility of like major game engines like Unity and Unreal contributed to the games industry and all the other adjacent industries? Uh, recently the kind of the hot topic has been Unreal 5 that everyone's looking forward to, but I don't think we would have ever really gotten to this point had earlier game engines be released. So yeah, I'd love to know your opinion.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, when I was first starting out, game development prior to say 2009 was something that was exceptionally exclusive. You had to basically have a very expensive development kit and a license to specific software and be in touch with publishers and distributors and have all of that sorted before you could get your foot in the door. And so the idea of independent games wasn't really a thing. Um, you would see a lot of games online with Flash, things like that. But since the advent of these tools like Unity and things like Unreal going free or much more accessible, it's really changed and lowered that barrier for entry so that pretty much anyone now, you don't even need a degree. Like you could just download one of these engines, go to YouTube, watch some tutorials, and bam, you're a game developer. So definitely, it's had a huge impact on the pool of games that are being made and games that are being played. And certainly there are some um, huge games that have like defined the industry in the last 5 or 10 years that just simply wouldn't have existed if these engines hadn't existed. As
Mm,
far as like other industries, I think the impact has been similar. I mean, as definitely in terms of things like the art space, I would say engines like this really allow more people to get involved in more interesting and interactive work. And I think it's like high time we've had more interactive stuff um, make its way into the space because it's such a fruitful space. There's so much potential here for interesting experiences that aren't necessarily game related, but are using the same engine. It's all just software in the end. Um, so for sure, yeah, it's had a huge impact.
yeah, that's it's interesting because I guess part of Origin as a collective out of Sydney, and for anyone who's new and is tuning in for the first time, uh, I, along with a couple of others, have started a collective called Origin, which is a media arts collective, basically connecting artists in Sydney and in Australia and hopefully beyond, uh, in basically, helping each other build up work and share exhibitions, and in some ways break down what galleries and what the public think of tech-based artworks, and that barrier that there is with like people not knowing how to interact with those kind of works, because I think we're constantly building for audiences who are first timers, and you have to build for audiences who are first timers. But I think if we can grow the general kind of consensus of what media arts works looks like, it gives people more room to expand those concepts a little further. Uh, and so I guess leading in from that point into and the point you mentioned about like interactive work in galleries, um, and considering there's a rise in this kind of work that is inspired and influenced by games, what are some of the like important elements of game design that you think are worth remembering that people should implement to keep audiences engaging with interactive work in galleries?
So I think for sure, I mean, games as a medium, have been for a long time, and more now than ever with mobile, really focused around the psychology of how to keep people's interest. Especially as starting as these basically just playthings with video games in like the 60s, 70s, and 80s, all the way till now in contemporary games. Definitely the science of, um, and this goes beyond games into interaction software in general. Things like websites, advertising, all of that. The idea you that people's attention is a premium and that you don't just get that for free.
Hmm.
That's definitely something that, in especially a gallery space, if you were to have lots of interactive works in the same space, because space is again like another premium, uh, you need to be able to contain people's attention and give them something that respects their time uh, in that competitive space, and can sort of manage that really tricky landscape in a very, what's the word, graceful way. So games do that really well.
Mm. I guess like it's interesting because in the last couple of years, especially kind of coinciding around the same time that indie dev became more of a thing as well, uh, we're seeing this push towards games being uh, kind of a notified form of art, and yet it's kind of consumed in a different way. You can put a film in a gallery, you can put music in a gallery, and you can put paintings and all of these other objects, interactive installations in galleries. But games themselves as an interactive piece uh, still like are still trying to find their footing a little bit. And there are games that exist within galleries. I know in I think it's in Melbourne. There's a gallery that has Journey in there that you can just play, and it's running all the time. But I guess the
Mm.
question is like, do games belong in galleries, and how like what's the best layout? What does that look like, and is it even is it even viable to have a space that's like a slow gallery, that has lots of ways to play the same or experience the same game?
Well, this is a huge topic here, I think, because there's a whole lot of definitions of terms you can do with the word game and what that means.
Hmm.
Are i- if you take a game that you would sit down and put into a PlayStation and then try to, superimpose that into a current modern gallery space, does that work at all? Maybe for
Mm.
very experimental, very small games like Journey, but I think there's probably something to be said for like, do is there a reason why we would even want games like that to be uh to be imported into the space? Does that necessarily have to happen? Is like, do these two things need to converge, or is there something in the middle that is a natural fit for both, that lets them sort of expand naturally rather than try to like be copy paste it over? So yeah, I think, especially like, just to get a little bit into it for a second, I think the term game has so much baggage associated with it.
Yeah.
And we talked about how game engines can be used to make much more than games. So I think, I mean, I've tried. There's no real nice, sexy, clean term that you can use, like interactive experience, maybe. But uh, to describe these things that are built-in game engines that have interactive, maybe even playful sort of mechanics, but aren't necessarily about winning or getting points, or have win conditions, or fail states. Um, Much like this Tilda Visual website that we're in right now. Um, do we have to create a new term for this stuff?
Hmm.
I don't know.
Yeah, that's that's been our biggest challenge. We're constantly trying to find words and titles to describe the stuff that we do. And all we could kind of really have that's established is media arts, because it kind of assumes that there's something tech involved and that it's using different systems. And still, people, think it's like social media, and that work is entwined. And I've
Mm.
heard I've heard the title new media works or tech-based works, but then when you think of tech, you think of like maybe mechanics or hardware and sensors and things like that.
Yeah,
And even
and it's
that
not
doesn't.
mixed media.
Yeah, yeah, it's really difficult. And I think there is probably a position or a place that we still haven't really figured out yet, where uh, people who define themselves as artists who are making non-goal oriented experiences have a platform on uh, like stores like Steam and platforms like the PlayStation and the Xbox, and vice
Oh yeah,
versa. That
this
there
is
are
such a
some,
huge conversation.
yeah, right,
Because exactly, going the other way, does art belong on the Steam, on the Steam store?
yeah,
Uh, that's a huge conversation, and there's been a lot of pushback from um, the gamer scene about non-games or walking simulators or games that don't have those traditional uh, y- conditions. Um, for sure. I mean, what I don't know. Maybe there's a room for a new platform, um, or yeah, definitely a place for these existing platforms, galleries, stores to expand to include what's obviously like a really fruitful area of technology and art and expression. I mean, this stuff is so compelling, especially with the advent of VR and the work that you do, particularly Pat. Um, I don't know if you want to speak to that for a second.
sure. So I make interactive installations that are mixed reality. Often I'll take uh, Unreal or Unity and then take some physical elements. So one of the works that I have is a kind of an interactive campfire setting. So I brought in camp chairs and firewood and potted some pine trees from a Christmas tree farm, and then leaned that all kind of up against a wall and set it up like a set. And projected on that back wall was the environment and the fire on the firewood, and then used sensors to kind of augment the space and bring it to life and have people have their physical presence affect the virtual space without them having to pick up a controller or even see where the sensors are. You know, there's this there's a term by Woodrow Barfield that defines this experience as transmateriality, where he says that transmateriality is data dancing as something physical or something that's real, and that
Mm.
it's kind of this hybrid of the two that creates this experience that can be measured, and through that we measure people's immersion and see how invested they are in it based on how connected they are. It's a yeah, I mean it's a whole thing, but I I guess part of the reasons why I'm so interested in this is like we're on the cusp of AR, right? Where you know the digital space and the physical space really do blur, and we will have augmented reality as a part of our social media and just connected to our devices. And so the concept of games, even like mobile games or AR games, will also I'm assuming would have that same kind of knock-on effect as like walking simulators, quote unquote. You know,
Yeah.
you can have these like digital games that don't necessarily have a goal but are still in physical space or even in a
Mm.
gallery, or I think the boundaries between these little like spheres are starting to break down.
For
That's
sure.
yeah,
You could even argue, the boundaries of the gallery are breaking down once you have sort of portable devices that are capable of, projecting interactive stuff into your field of vision that you can interact with in the physical space. In a park, they're still localized, but um, are totally sort of like an intersection between physical and virtual.
yeah.
Um, who needs the gallery? Maybe we just
Just
set
lose the
up the spaces
galleries.
wherever we want.
Yeah, totally. uh there's a really great work called the City of Forking Paths by Janet Cardiff, and she herself makes a bunch of works all around the world. But the whole experience is that it's a binaural recording uh, matched with video that starts in one location in a city, and you follow the path that the person is walking and the narration that's happening, and it takes you through the cities. And there's one in the city of Sydney, starts at Customs House and Circular Quay, takes you to the back of the rocks. It's about an hour and a half. And you put in your headphones. You can only start it from there and at a certain time. So it's time and location based that runs off the app. And from there, you walk through. It takes you out of Customs House, walks you through the city, but they've augmented all these elements into the video and into the audio that you're hearing. And after a couple of minutes, it really starts just becoming connected, especially if you're holding it relatively close to your vision. Like my memory of doing that work started to feel like an augmented reality experience because you're walking through these sections and you're seeing the same streets at the same lighting at the
Yeah.
same time.
Mhm.
And it's a permanent work now because it's a video, but it's spatial video. So you can download it off the App Store, or you can go into Customs House and all you got to do is hand over some form of identity, and they'll give you a little iPhone that's got the video on it. Uh, and it just walks you through the city and tells a story, and you can hear people walking past you because it's recorded binaurally, and it's really, really incredible. But that work in particular, I think, is so ahead of its time. And I think about games and how they'll kind of take on that effect when augmented reality comes in. That I'm like super excited. I'm really, really keen to see what comes of it and to be a part of it, as
Yeah,
kind of a creative in this sphere.
for sure. I mean, the future is insanely exciting, and it's not even a question of like speculating what might be. This stuff is basically doable now. It's just about that threshold of demand meets appeal, um, meets capability of the technology. But yeah, it's pretty much there.
Yeah,
It's crazy.
totally. So I guess taking the questions kind of back to you for a little bit. I was wondering if you had any advice for artists or designers who are looking to start their own projects and build something independently and full time that you mightn't have had given to you that you'd give to people now, had you been able to talk to yourself in the past or
Sure.
whatnot.
Definitely, I'll reiterate some advice that was given to me that I didn't take, um, which is to start small. There's a huge amount of risk in taking on a multi-year project as your first major project, specifically and especially if it's independent. Um, I don't really regret the amount of uh, the burden that this has been and the sort of scope and scale of what I'm working on. But for sure, if you're looking to make your own game, whether it's by yourself, whether it's your dream game or with a team and just a small game, just know that like it's a it it can be as heavy as you want it to be, depending on the expectations you put on yourself. So it's really important to be uh, kind to yourself by not putting yourself in a position where you can't afford to fail. Um, because whether you fail or not, the pressure that you'll be experiencing uh, might not might not be worth it. You know, you
Mm,
might find yourself experiencing burnout or losing a little bit of that passion that got you started if you bite off much more than you can chew. And so I think definitely keep in mind when you want to start something like this, if you're thinking about it, to do it for the sake of the work. Don't do it to chase some ambition. And pick something that you can afford to fail. You know, pick something that you'll be proud of, even if it doesn't go exactly where you want it to go.
mhm.
Sure.
And
That might sound a bit bleak, but it's I think it's a positive message.
would you
Still
say,
make stuff for sure.
yeah, would you say that doing things like game jams, something that's like small, bite-sized, but still comes out with like a finished product, would you say that that's like a nice way to be able to dedicate some time without losing too much sleep or like sacrificing a lot of the stability that you might have prior and be
Oh, for
like,
sure. Game jams were my start in game development. They are an incredibly valuable way to explore your own inner game developer and also to meet new people, to get some fresh eyes on your content, and to really start building your own little portfolio of games for
mm,
sure. And I actively still engage in them. The game that I'm working on currently is a post game jam game. and it'll be on the Google Play Store in the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, awesome. And I guess like here's a bit of a curveball question that I mightn't have kind of mentioned earlier, but what was the process in tackling Ludum Dare this time around compared to last time? Because I know, and for context for anyone who wasn't aware, uh, you worked on a game jam entry that you weren't so satisfied with, and it was ambitious. So I guess kind of coming around the second time, uh, what things did you kind of keep in check that you didn't do the first time that was like good advice to yourself when it came to like approaching games jams?
Right. So I participate in game jams pretty frequently, more recently than so I started with them. I took a few years off, and then I've been doing them recently. And the last two are the ones you're referring to. So in October, I did a game called Contraband, and it did well. I definitely overscoped it, um, and made some, pretty innocent but avoidable errors
Hmm.
in just design and where I prioritize my time and the kinds of uh, the way that I kind of mm, targeted the game from like an audience perspective. So it's really important just for any of you who are well, I guess I'll answer the question directly. The thing that I changed from last time to this time was to basically I record everything that I do because I stream. So I went back and watched the previous entry and I took note of all of the comments that people gave me. And then I watched back the recording and I tried to identify the spots where I made the mistakes that led to the negative feedback that I got.
Mm.
And this is something that I think is super important regardless of what you're doing. If you're doing anything that's creative that is going to have an audience and you want to increase the positive reception to that thing, it's so important to have that retrospective look at what you've done and to make some connection between the choices that you made and the outcomes that you received. So I did that and I made some guiding principles for the next project. And that one was the one that I finished in April, which was called Remember Apollo. And I did really well. I placed in the top 10 in a few categories out of like 5,000 plus entrants.
So incredible.
So yeah, it was really positive and very vindicating to have that audience and be able to say like, hey, like you guys who watch me, I am capable of like uh, producing something that's worth you watching me for, uh, and I do know how to, if not, if I'm not necessarily at the destination, I'm definitely on course, and I know how to like sail this ship.
Yeah, that's awesome. And that also speaks to the importance of documenting as you make, right? Like the
Mm,
fact that you were able to go back and look at the changes that you were making and the things that people
mm,
had problems with is so handy. And I'm so guilty of, and I'm trying to kind of slowly correct the the attitude that like I just need to get it done and not
mm,
documenting and not writing down or not archiving the things that you'd worked on prior, because like the last thing that you want to do is kind of recreate something from a project or revisit something and not have anything to go back on. It's basically
mm,
like your long-term memory that you have to just that documentation kind of replaces.
for
uh,
sure.
and being able to come back to that with fresh eyes is so helpful. So helpful. Basically,
Oh, definitely.
all of the programming that I've been doing recently has been like based off the stuff that I was learning prior and
Mm.
revising.
Yeah, for sure. And even things like the emotional attachment that you might have had when you were in the moment, in the prior work that you might have done, coming back at it with clear eyes and not having that attachment, allows you to look at it so much more objectively. And in any design, whether it's art specific or user centered or game design, I mean, data is everything, and having that ability to go back and look at things, that's power. That's the only way you can really um, do this in an efficient way, to improve and to reach targets and get where you want to go.
Hmm. So on that note, getting where you want to go, uh, assuming that Insignia all works out and people are buying it and it has its success, what's the future of Up on Hill look like? Do you want to keep
Dream.
working on games? What's the dream? What's the yeah? What's the pipe dream look like?
Uh, I mean, look, I am a sort of diehard classic video game sort of aficionado. Like I grew up playing these games, and I have such a real soft spot in my heart, and just I guess like it's part of who I am to to associate myself with these kind of games. I would love to continue making console style games, maybe at a bigger scale, maybe with a team, sort of retreading and um, sort of adding transformations and making new kinds of games in old classic formats. Or yeah,
Yeah, that'd be super cool. And even the prospect of working with a team must feel like something in some ways relieving again.
oh yeah, the solo stuff. Uh, I don't know. I don't really know where along my life I sort of began down this path where I would do it by myself. I love working with people, and I've worked in a team professionally before. I think probably there's a film called Indie Game the Movie. I think watching that poisoned my poisoned my ego, where I thought it would be some sort of like poetic thing if I did it all myself.
Yeah.
But yeah, I certainly have like experienced a lot of uh, growing pains and just pain in general, trying to expand my skill set to do stuff that isn't in my wheelhouse that I think would be much less painful if I had someone skilled who could offset my shortcomings.
Yeah, that's been such an eye opener for this team as well, working on all of the artworks for this exhibition that's running at the moment. And for Origin, it started off as a team of two, myself and my friend Alvin, and now it's a team of five, and that team of five has such a large scope, and we all, because we're all equally contributing to the same thing, we all equally care about this one thing. It feels foreign for me, and I'm sure it would for you as well. Do you have somebody like, oh yeah, I'll do that thing for you. Let me just like spend 2 hours of my night just like fixing one of your works because it helps us all. I'm like, that's so nice. I've never had this before.
Oh, definitely, for sure. I mean,
Yeah,
I've made a lot of really amazing friends on this journey, and it would be I know for sure that they have skills that I do not have. That would save me so much time and heartache, and I'm sure I could save them time and heartache too.
yeah. Cool. Well, thanks for jumping into Meeting Hill and chatting with me. It's nice to kind of talk this way,
Yeah,
and to interview
we used to
rather
live
than
together,
yeah,
and now we don't. So this is a nice way of catching up.
yeah. Uh, I suppose, do you have any kind of like last wrap up pitches or things that you want to mention to people listening,
Mm.
where they can find your demo or like the stuff that you're working on and what's coming in the
Oh yeah,
future?
for sure. I, as Patrick mentioned, have a YouTube channel. It's called, it's my name, so Adam C, third letter of the alphabet, Younis, Younis. If you search me up there, you'll find my Indie Tales YouTube channel, and from there you'll find all the links to my Discord and everything else that I have going. So definitely check my stuff out. I am releasing games and tutorials and just reflection videos and bits and pieces all the time. So if you're interested in that kind of thing, definitely give it a look.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys, and thanks Adam for coming. Um, Coming up in the next day or so, or the next couple of days, we've got some pretty cool stuff in the works. Tomorrow, there's a chat with all of the artists who are a part of this exhibition. So, this actual exhibition, you can find at ARC, so ARC-IRL2URL. And there are 4 different artworks made by the other partners of the collective Origin. So we're having an artist chat tomorrow about that. And then Friday is a day off. Saturday we've got one of the team Callum. He's going to be spinning the decks from 7:30. So definitely tune in for that because that's going to be really cool. But yeah, thanks everybody, and hope to see you again soon. Thanks for coming to Meeting Hill.
Thank you.
See you later.